This one actually, is it worshipful? Is it worshipful brother? Is it illustrious? Or is it just brother? He's also a Masonic author, so we're going to give him kudos for that. Welcome to the Craftsmen Online podcast, Brother Austin.
Oh, Brother Michael, thank you so much for having me.
The last name's the easy part. Schifrin, that one's simple. It's what we say before we get to that part.
I have heard it mangled in so many creative ways, though.
Yes, as someone with a fun last name myself, I have been there. I got to say, first time guest here on the podcast, and I'm excited because you've had the release of your new book, Black Stars, which is now available on Amazon. If you're interested in getting this book now, bang, you'll find the link to purchase it through Amazon in the show notes for this episode. As your second book, it's following the success of More Light, your first book. Before we get into all of the new work that you've done, I'm just curious about the title, Black Ink Farther Stars. Is there a deeper meaning there?
I am glad you asked, and to some extent, I would say there is, yes. So it comes from two anecdotes, two different things that happened in my life, kind of right on the heels of each other. I don't want to spoil too much for potential future readers, but it does come from, I did explain it in the intro to the book because I kind of felt like it might be unfair to people if I didn't. I was with my girlfriend and her family out for an evening at a astronomical observatory out here in the Pittsburgh area. And we were listening to a fella who was giving a guided tour who's on the faculty at the University of Pittsburgh in their astronomy department and was explaining some of the operations of the observatory and the telescopes that they have there. And he was telling us a little bit about parallax. And for those who might not already be familiar with parallax, it's a method that is used if you want to try to gauge the distance between the Earth and some faraway object like a star, where you observe that faraway object at one time of year and wait until the Earth has traveled a distance around the sun, and you make another observation of the same faraway object at a different point in time, right? So you'll still be sitting in the same city on Earth, but you have now observed that faraway object from two different positions in space, one at one side of the sun and one at the other. And you're going to notice that that faraway object is at a slightly different angle from you in the second observation than it was at the first. And you can use these angles and what we know about the distance between the one place that you were sitting on one side of the sun and the other place that the Earth arrived at on the other side of the sun to figure out the distance from us to that star. That property is called parallax. But he was explaining to us that the farther away that object is, the more powerful a telescope they need to be able to detect the very tiny differences in the angle between the one observation and the other. So the farther away that object is, the more powerful the telescope needs to be to detect the very subtle difference between observation at time 1 and time 2. That was the first thing that happened. Just about a week or so later, I'm noodling around on Facebook, like some Freemasons sometimes do, as much of a minefield as that might be nowadays. And I was looking at a group called Esoteric Freemasonry for Thoughtful Men and Women. And somebody had shared a lecture from Harvard Divinity School. Ooh, you know what? I want to look up the lecturer's name because I don't want to mangle it. You want to be courteous to these folks, right? Yeah, fellow's name was Professor Wouter Hanegraaff, and he comes from the University of Amsterdam. He's given a lecture called "Reasonably Irrational: Theurgy and the Pathologization of Entheogenic Experience." That is a mouthful right there.
That just rolls right off the tongue. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, just trips right off the tongue. But to boil it down, what he's talking about is how ancient cultures had a different standard for their experience with divinity, right? They might not settle like some of us will for a one-way communication where we go to pray and then we don't know whether or not to expect to hear back from our divinity, right? they would sometimes engage in practices where they felt guaranteed of having a very personal and direct experience with their higher being. And one of the approaches that they took, the ancient Greeks took to do this under some circumstances, was working with a substance called contritus. It was an ingredient for concocting black ink, and this could be used for in a practice, a ritual practice that they had, where you would follow a very specific ritual of writing out a prayer on a leaf. You would recite the prayer, and then you would lick the prayer off of the leaf. Well, guess what? Contritus has psychoactive properties.
So I had a feeling we were going down this. This was the road we were taking here. Yeah.
Rest assured, if you follow the formula correctly, you are going to have a very direct experience with your higher power, with your divine being. So I'm listening to this lecture, and I'm thinking about the black ink metaphorically. I'm not thinking about literally consuming the psychoactive substance, but I was kind of thinking of it from this framework of when we read, when we consume literature, we are absorbing the substance of that literature. And that has this potential to expand our minds. So I was thinking of, what do we need to do to be able to empower us to observe subtler things, like the angle at the farther distance? So black ink, farther stars.
Dude, I totally dig it. And I knew there was a story behind that. It wasn't just what would be a great name for the next Coldplay album. Like, I knew that some deep thoughts were in there, because your book, and we're only going to be able to talk about a few chapters tonight, but you cover a lot of esoteric aspects. We're going to be talking about the tarot. We'll be talking about allied Masonic bodies tonight. We'll be talking about the history and preserving the history of our ancient and gentle craft. But I guess the thing that surprised me the most was that most of this book, it seems, was kind of compiled from lectures or papers or research or presentations that you had done for your lodge and also your Scottish Rite Valley. So those brothers actually got to see the interactive side of this. The rest of us are getting to read the book form of it. Talk a little bit about that process, how you took all of these different ideas and brought them under this book with multiple chapters.
Thank you for asking. I don't really know. I try to remember that what appeals to me as a writer is going to appeal to some folks as an audience, and maybe not necessarily everyone. So I will admit that I took a pretty diverse approach to the material, the content of this book. And the thing is, I have diverse interests, I have diverse tastes, so I chose to write about diverse stuff. I mean, I'm also fortunate in that some of the entities that reached out to me to book me as a speaker, give me a certain amount of latitude. They're like, hey, write what interests you. We'd be happy to hear it. And then, likewise, sometimes there is a little bit more of a thematic suggestion, right? So like when I had an opportunity to present to an ingathering of the Allied Masonic degrees, I wanted to write about something that was relevant to the Allied Masonic degrees. And that's that history paper that makes its way into the book. When I was putting together a presentation for the Symposium on Esoteric Freemasonry that was put on by Lodge Ad Lucem here in Pittsburgh, I picked subject matter that I felt suitably fit an esoteric theme. I mean, I had also been inspired by something specific that another brother in my lodge had already been presenting, kind of set me off on a little path. But you're absolutely right. The content that is collected in this book comes directly from a series of different presentations, most of which I made in the past 2 years. There's only one that dates back a little farther than that. I want to say 2018. Somebody's going to correct me about my own book. But the presentation that was Ritual Across Time and Space, I did that for Pennsylvania Council of Deliberation, which is an aggregate of people involved in Scottish Rite from all throughout Pennsylvania. And I was doing a presentation for the ritualists from all of these different valleys. So that was a presentation about the history of performance and ritual, not just Masonic ritual, but rituals from a variety of different cultures throughout history. That one dates back a little farther, and I want to say that was 2018.
Okay. And as a writer, I'm just curious about this because I've given a few lodge presentations. I'm nowhere near getting ready to compile or even make a book on this because I recognize that there's a huge difference than being able to speak on something as somewhat of like a subject matter expert to my friends, my brothers in the room, like men that I know are going to give me honest feedback and I have a warm reception from them versus actually putting something into a published document that is, researched, vetted, goes through the editorial process. What's it like when you have this idea? Because in my mind, I'm kind of picturing as this is kind of like working on an ashlar. You have a very rough idea of what you want to talk about. And the more people that you share this with, the more fine, the more perfect that it gets.
Yeah. I mean, I have a certain amount of latitude because particularly this most recent book, however much of a stigma might be attached to this concept, this most recent book is self-published. Now, do I believe that it still is going to confront a court of public opinion? Right? Absolutely. I certainly edited and proofread it as thoroughly as I was capable of, and likewise, I enlisted the help of 4 or 5 other brethren to run some material past and say, what are you seeing here? But by the same token, I have to tell you, it didn't come naturally to me. I've had to grow a little bit of a thick skin and recognize that not everything is going to appeal to everybody, right? I know that I find when I go in person to make a presentation, I fall a little bit on the academic side, right? I'm a little bit cerebral, and that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Having said that, when I make a presentation, if I find at the end of the thing that 2 or 3 brethren run up to me at the end with enthusiasm, and they're like, what you just made me think of is this. Or like, oh, have you heard of this other author? Or, hey, I read this other article. I saw this other YouTube. And I know that my nerds are out there. So I'm just looking for my other nerd. Right?
Well, I laugh because you're like, it's called question and answer portion, not your time to get up and tell me your theory of what you believe in something.
No, dude, let somebody else info dump. If they've been listening to me for 45 minutes, let somebody else info dump. That's totally okay.
I love it though, because they throw something that's like a 3-minute long like expose of like what they've researched or what they've read about, right? And then you're just sitting there going, is there a question here somewhere that I missed? Thank you.
Right, yes. Okay, so what was your question? But that's okay, man. It's all right when that happens.
Yeah. No, and it is helpful. It's kind of the formal editorial process where things get shaped, and then you're kind of also getting an interesting chance. Like writers, I guess at a certain point, who your audience is and who you're writing to. But Masonically, that's always a tricky boat to try to, because as you mentioned, like there's brothers that are really into the esoteric parts of the craft. And then there's some guys, if you say the word esoteric around them, they start heading for the door. They don't want any part of that. And your book covers so many different ideas and topics that's what I love about this. You can tell this was a well-researched, almost peer-reviewed body of work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will say that I began to try to establish some semblance of academic rigor in the first book. Some of what I write is op-ed, in which case the only real motivator for citations is just so that other people could dig further because they're curious. And then other stuff, because it's more journalistic or academic or fact-based, I want to provide my citations so that people know that I didn't make anything up out of thin air,
Right. That's key.
But either way, I would say that there was an evolution from the first book to the second where I set my bar even higher in terms of making sure that citations and references were there so that for either purpose, if people were just curious and wanted to learn more, or if people wanted to fact check me, like the citations are there, the references are there, people can look and find the primary source material And I don't want to leave anyone in the lurch in that regard.
Let's get inside the cover. We're going to start touching some of the topics that you kindly shared the preview for. And contemplating death, that's one of the subjects that you cover in Black Ink Farther Stars. Ironically, I wanted to talk about this with you, Austin, because it's been one of the areas of focus. And we never really set out here on the Craftsman Online podcast and say, hey, the theme of this season is going to be death. Last year, we spent a lot of time talking about George Washington for some reason and his legacy and Freemasonry, and then across the United States. This season we've had quite a few episodes that get into that. I was interesting to read your ideas on it. So what did you learn about the contemplation of death as a way of providing an enriching and fulfilling life, not just for Freemasons but for anybody that picks up Black Ink Farther Stars?
I think there's three main takeaways that constitute what I learned. So one is that it's easy to go down a route where thinking about how brief our life is and how small and trivial individual human beings are can stun you into a state of numbness where you're like, well, then what's the use? Like, it's everything might begin to look futile, and I'm not going to pick on anybody who has that reaction either, because it's understandable that things could nudge you into this perspective. There is a second route that this contemplation of mortality can spur you onto, which is, oh, if my time on Earth and my ability to reach and touch other people is so stunted and so challenged, then I better get off my duff now, right? Like, now is the time to act. Now is the time to do something that builds something, some kind of lasting legacy, has an impact on someone, changes the world around me for the better, because who knows how long I have. So this is, right, you've got perspective A, you've got perspective B. And then I think the third thing that was really the takeaway, if I can articulate it, is just that recognizing that the limitation doesn't mean that you can't be a part of something greater, right? So it's like, if we want to go straight to the metaphor of the workmen, on cathedrals and universities who built these big, amazing edifices out of stone, right? Sometimes it didn't get done in a generation. Some of those cathedrals that you look at when you tour Western Europe took 20 generations of men to build. Something outrageous like that, right? So sometimes the fact that we labor together on something allows our aggregate contribution to be a greater landmark than we might have accomplished alone. So those are my three takeaways. I mean, I hope that you will give the longer chapter a chance. I hope I didn't distill it down too fast, but those are my three big takeaways.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in all of those phases, you experience those in your Blue Lodge or in your Valley. Because if you think about it, the circle that you have in your own life is like your immediate like family and like close friends, right? And then once you start getting involved with your district or your lodge or your valley and you start traveling, you start coming across the experience of all these different men. And we've all got the friends that are like the daredevils, they're the deep sea divers, or they do like rock climbing or other crazy stuff. You're like, no way, man, not happening. And then you also have, brothers that for whatever reason, they have to lay down their working tools, and you have to go through that moment of like true loss. And like you talk about legacy and how to remember people. And that makes a very profound impact on men, especially Freemasons. If you look at like kind of the average age for a Freemason is, somewhere between the age of like 35 to like maybe 75, that's a wide window to really consider your mortality. On top of that, you're also getting all of these lessons about how to be a virtuous and good person and how you should be living your life. So you're walking around observing everyday life, you're experiencing life with other like-minded men like yourself, and now you're reading and you're researching some of these secret teachings to kind of understand the ancient mysteries. That's a pretty full perspective, I would say.
I mean, I know that I joined Blue Lodge in 2006 when I was 31. I hope nobody's trying to do the math. And the first year or two that I was a member in Blue Lodge, I went to a lot of funerals. I mean, a lot.
Hmm.
And it was a strange experience for a couple of different reasons, not least of which was just realizing that I was going to so many funerals of men who I didn't know well.
Yeah.
So most of these were guys I had never even sat in Blue Lodge with. But the fellows, the more experienced fellows who brought me in to Blue Lodge were regaling me with stories. Oh, this guy, he was so regular and so consistent back in the day when we were both younger. And he's a past master of this lodge. And this one did a great first degree, and that one did a great third degree. Um, and I remember, after the first 5 or 10 of them, it slowly dawned on me. I was like, someday I'm going to be going to these funerals for people that I actually do know well. And that's a transition that you can only grow into. Nobody can
Yeah.
teach you how that should happen or tell you how you should feel. That's a transition that you have to grow into as a man.
Let's talk about a little bit more of an upbeat topic. It's one that is incredibly becoming more popular with brothers that I meet, and that's tarot cards. Um, my uncle Steve, who is the closest person I know that's into it, this is a way of entertainment for him, as he always says. He loves to do card readings for me. I like the way that he explains not just the designs on the card, but also some of the deeper meanings of the symbolism that's in there. In your book, Black Ink, Farther Stars, you explore how tarot cards can be used as a visual aid. I like how you put that, to study the system of the 18 virtues that have been proposed. So, how can, as a Freemason, we use this deck as a tool to study virtue?
Glad you're asking. And I want to throw out there as this caveat, right? That I've had a long personal history with the tarot, but where the direction that I was coming from when I wrote this particular piece does not necessarily have to do with the notion of using tarot for divination or forecasting. This is not an article. This is not a presentation about telling the future. Now,
Hmm.
no disrespect intended to people who like that application and that approach, but I did want to just lay this out as a welcome or an introduction to people who are not interested in that particular use of the tarot, to let them know that this is an essay that they can still uh, digest and appreciate because it still has its practical application. And what is the point of this essay? The point of this essay is that another brother in Lodge Ad Lucem number 812, who was at the time our worshipful master, Max Hammer, was doing a presentation about a philosopher by the name of Andre Comte Sponville. Fortunately, I did not leave his book far away.
A
That
prepared
book,
guest. I like this.
right? So we're gonna shout out somebody else. That book is called A Small
Looks
Treatise
like
on
great
Great Virtue,
virtues.
right?
Yep.
Andre Comte Sponville. Now, Brother Max was doing a presentation about this book, and is a more contemporary French philosopher who laid out a system of 18 virtues. That's a lot of virtues. Some people, there are a system of 4 cardinal virtues and 3 theological virtues. That makes a system of 7 church virtues. Seven's a good number. That's a pretty easy thing to grapple with and even to memorize. But 18, that's a little beefier, right? Um,
Mm.
but this fellow Sponville had a very rational notion behind his system of 18 virtues, because he's saying in life there are some simple virtues that we learn even as children. And as we progress in our moral development, we can learn the lesson of more sophisticated virtues. So, I mean, just a good example that I can give is one of the very early virtues that he cites is politeness. Uh, we may be able to agree that politeness is a positive thing that should be encouraged in people. Certainly, it's something that we start with children. hey, you should say please and thank you. But the funny thing about politeness is that it's very basic and it's very simple. And in fact, you're not really enforcing that the person be good on a deep, profound level, but you're saying, please at least engage in this behavior. It is, in its own way, a somewhat superficial form of virtue. Um, but something more like generosity or compassion. Compassion is a more sophisticated one, and the linguistic root of the word compassion, calm with, and passio to suffer. So compassion means the ability to suffer with another person. That's a little bit more profound, a little bit deeper than politeness, a surface thing that's more about engaging in the right behaviors, right? So all 18 of these are laid out in kind of a chain that says only when you have been able to perform at this level will you be able to absorb the subtler and more profound lessons of this level, right? And as Max was going through some of these virtues, I was like, some of these virtues, the very names of them are the names of specific tarot cards. Just kind of popped into my head. And there's actually a reason for that, but I'm not going to get us lost in the weeds because I know we've got certain ground to cover. But some of the virtues in Sponville's system are explicitly the names of individual tarot cards. But as Max went on over the course of a few months, the more different virtues he laid out for us, even some of the ones that aren't explicitly the names of existing tarot cards, I was able to think of symbolism that I could remember from an earlier point in my life when I was more actively utilizing the tarot, when I said, oh, this symbolism actually captures the essence and the notion of this virtue. And as time went on, I found correspondences for all 18. And I thought, I know that we have this esoteric symposium coming up. I think that what I want to propose here is not that the tarot needs to be used for some more occult, mystical application, but really, if you use the pictures on these cards that are supposed to tell us stories, you see people engaged in actions. You see a man holding a scale and handing coins to people in the street, sitting on the curb. This is a symbolic representation of generosity. I can use these pictures that tell me this story to remind me of these virtues in my act of trying to study and learn and absorb these virtues, which surely is a Masonic calling, the study of virtue.
I'm also thinking how much fun this would be. This has to be one of your Scottish Rite essays, because 18 cards, 32 degrees, so many things to cover. Like, you must have had just a field day just laying out those cards and saying, this relates to this.
Well, again, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who might be excited to pick up the book. But
it's a little tease, I guess, there.
It's so funny because I very much enjoy the social aspect of driving out to a lodge at night, sitting down with some fellas for dinner, and then standing up and presenting to people, and the social interaction of that recharges my batteries. I am one of those extrovert people, right? Having said that, though, I love the aspect of just sitting in here and doing the research and writing. So if you're asking me, was it fun to write this article? It's always fun to write the articles.
Let's switch gears. You brought this one up during our prep call, and I was like, I can't wait to read the chapter on this one, because you don't really think of some of the other appendant bodies of Freemasonry to be involved in preserving the history of Freemasonry. You kind of look at them as just being kind of focused in their rite or their area. So, for example, you're a past master. We mentioned that at the beginning of the recording. You're also a active member of the Scottish Rite Valley near you in Pennsylvania, a 33rd degree Mason. But I really like the idea that you presented on how appendant Masonic bodies are getting together to preserve our unique Masonic history. And those are the work being done by the Allied Masonic Degrees, AMD for short, and also the College of Rights. Can you
Yep,
give us a little bit more background on how these two groups are working together to preserve our history?
absolutely. So the Allied Masonic Degrees is an invitational body that's an offshoot of the York Rite. It functions and operates a little bit differently in the UK than it does in the US. But fundamentally, what's going on there is you had a handful of degrees that have been referred to sometimes as side degrees, which means that they were conferred in Blue Lodges with a fairly at the time a somewhat minimal amount of costuming and props, for want of a better term. Um, but it was periodically, a brother would be taken aside and they would say, okay, now that you have your craft degrees, we'd also like you to see this. Um,
Mm.
and the thing is, because it was a little bit of a fringe practice, um, it had its heyday, and then it also started to dwindle. And people who were just enamored with these degrees and did not want to see them disappear from the face of the earth said, well, you know what? There isn't one big old grand governing body to help sustain and preserve these. What can we do? And a few brethren who, all the details are there. A few brethren gathered together and said, let's take these, accumulate them, gather them in one place, and preserve them for posterity. These didn't used to be part of one cohesive system, but we're bringing them together under one umbrella. We're going to call it the Allied Masonic Degrees, and we will, now we will preserve it for future generations so that they shouldn't disappear.
Mm.
But somewhat simultaneous, or at least overlapping with this, there were people with a different notion, not entirely unrelated, wanting to preserve the ritual work, the literature of these organizations, which were fading fast, but they preferred to take a different approach, which was by publishing them. Right now, if you publish it and you put it out into the public sphere, you've lost your secrecy. Something about it is no longer Masonic in the way that it was.
Mm.
It has been preserved. It has been saved for all time, but it's no longer performed. And that's the agreement of the Grand College of Rights. This degree will never be performed again, but now you've got it laid out in explicit detail, and we've got it archived, and it will be preserved for all time. And you can look it back up again because we keep all of these references. It's all saved and preserved. But the neat thing is, and now I'm not a member of Grand College of Rights yet, but what's really cool is in AMD, in our ritual book, interlaced with the scripts, you've got a little bit of history, and it says, for further details on this, refer to this publication of Grand College of Rights. So there's this symbiosis going on between the two organizations, helping preserve this really neat stuff from off on the fringes of the hinterlands of Freemasonry.
Mm. Or as that one very familiar line says, the secrets for future generations to discover, which it's nice to see we've got brothers like you in the quarry there getting to work with the working tools and trying to put all this together.
Right on, man.
The book is called Black Ink Farther Stars. We're getting ready to shut down this episode. Brother Austin, I'll get you out of here on this question. I've noted, I told you earlier, I've been following you on Instagram, and I talked about your papers and your presentations, and I can tell that you're a very active brother in your lodge, in your district, and in your valley. What advice do you have for those brothers that started out like you many, many years ago, might be listening right now? And they're like, hey, I've got this great program, or I've got something I want to say in lodge, or maybe something I want to write about. How do they start putting that together to take it to the next level?
Oh, that's a fine question. I think that there's two answers to that, right? One is one comes back to something that you and I were talking about both before we began recording and early on in this recording. That stuff about
Cats
knowing
under the desk.
yeah, but it's not the desk. It's not the desk. But that whole notion about knowing your audience, like, I think there's one challenge, which is trying, you may be interested in sharing this with the Blue Lodge right where you're sitting right now. But there's also other places that we know will welcome you. So if if you might just have a tidbit that's 2 minutes long that you want to share at the close of lodge when when your master says, "Does anybody else have anything to offer?" Right? And if you've got that 2 minute tidbit, that's a dope time to roll it out. Right? That's great. Um, if you have something more welling up in you, then there might be a couple of different available avenues to you, right? So, I mean, a lot of now, I don't want to speak for somebody else's jurisdiction where I don't know the facts, but a lot of different states have a research lodge, right? That might be a place to participate. Um, you might have lodges that are looking for a whole program. They might be looking for you to fill 15 minutes, a half hour, an hour. Um, so you may, or your jurisdiction or your district or your Blue Lodge or one of your appendant bodies, they may have a publication. They might have a magazine or a newsletter they put out, and they might be like, well, shoot, this month we're looking to fill some column inches, and we don't even have enough contributions. So you got to find the right outlet to plug yourself into in the first place. But the one other thing I want to throw out there is this. When I was growing up as a kid, I went to a Quaker school. And the Quakers are a Christian branch that has a philosophy that does not look to have a separate spiritual leader running their congregation, because everyone has a piece of the divine in them. And what it means that everybody's got something to contribute. When they are conducting a service, anybody who feels moved spiritually to get up and share something with the community gets up and shares. And for me, as a little kid, little kids, it can take a little while to adjust to something like that. It can feel a little bit exotic if it's not where you started from. But it encouraged me throughout the rest of my life to say, if I feel the right motivation, if I know that what it is coming out of me is something that is intended to enhance the experience of the rest of my brethren and to be something that is mentally and spiritually nutritive, then I'm going to let it out there because I feel like I've got something worth sharing. And I feel like I want more people to feel that way about themselves too.
I agree. I love that. I lied. I got one more bonus question if you got time.
Bonus round.
Yeah. I'm sure it's the last thing that an author wants to hear, but we've been really fortunate on this podcast, not just to have him on as guests, but also friends to the show. Brother John Nagy, Brother Chris Ruley, Brother Angel Millar. They'll come on, talk about their latest work. And it's the one question I'll ask them, and they'll look at me, and some of them with daggers and others like, oh, I'm already starting. I've laid the groundwork. What's next? Are you already thinking about your third book? Like, what's after Black Game Other Stars?
That's very naughty of you, but yes, I am.
Okay.
For me, the process of writing thus far has been pretty organic. The first book was a collection of articles which already existed. So it was more an issue of curating, right? Trying to select the things that I felt like were of a quality that I wanted to release. Then, in the course of the next following 2 years after that, because I was writing new material for in-person presentations, I started accumulating more content that I thought would be acceptable as the core of a second book. In the time since I started work on the second book, I have started writing other new material that I was not going to try to cram in with what was already kind of making its way through the editorial process to be the second book. So, yes, I already have some content that I have planned for the third. I'd say I have about 80% of what I want, but I will tell you that even doing the self-published thing now which some of these online platforms make somewhat convenient, it was still a real labor of love. So I feel like I got to give myself a little bit of breathing room before I try to execute the next publication. But the truth is, you're correct. It is in the works.
All right, all right. Well, I'm also interested to hear what the next title will be. Don't tell me if you got it picked out. We want to leave something for the next episode, because you do a bang up job. Like Black Ink, Farther Stars. I can't stop saying that enough. I want a T-shirt because people are going to walk up and ask you what that's all about. But congratulations on this second book, Worshipful Brother, Illustrious Brother, Just Brother, also Masonic author Austin Schifrin. Thank you so much for making time and joining us on Craftsmen Online.
Brother Michael, thank you so much. I appreciate